we live in professional college football. Like, it's here. It's been here a couple years, and we're still wrapping our minds around it. And this is what I hope as a more of a traditionalist in college football. College football was more transformational. It's now more transactional. That doesn't mean that it's not transformational anymore. It just requires a little more effort.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I am your host, Yogi Roth, joined by Jim Thornby. Today's guest, we had to get somebody who played for the Buckeyes, so of course we did that. Ben Hartsock, voice on SiriusXM, 10 years in the NFL, also national champion from the Ohio State University. So this is officially our first postseason show, Jim. I'm wearing a hat because I was like, I'm not doing my hair. It's supposed to be my first day off. We're still recording stuff, but that's just the nature of the beast, brother. Your thoughts on the finale of, it's a long run for us, bro. July 6th to January 20th. Here we go.
Quite the long run, and quite the long run for both of those teams. I mean, you got a historic number of games, which in some ways I was worried that maybe the game wouldn't be very good because of that. Maybe if you had whatever. Last week when we were talking about picking the games, and I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm gonna pick Notre Dame. And it was, and I prefaced it with, there's no logical reason for me to do this, but I'm gonna go ahead and just say that they're gonna win anyway. There's some Irish thing, and then what happens? You get that first drive with, they just basically fed Riley Leonard all the way down, and you're like, what was it, 18 plays, 75 yards, almost 10 minutes of possession. It was like basically the entire first quarter. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe they actually do have a chance here. So I'm curious, is like, I know you were in Chicago for the Big Ten Network there in the studio watching that, like where, I know you were obviously a big believer in Ohio State going into that game. Where did you kind of come out of it from that game?
Yeah, well, I think this is like, you're right. You watch that first drive and you're like, oh, here come the Irish. 9 carries from their quarterback, Riley Leonard. And then here comes Ohio State. They answer with a beautiful drive of their own. And then all the things that, you can't do in a championship game happen on the very next drive, right? Like 2 penalties on the next drive for Notre Dame. They go 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. That's the first half. Yeah. And they're down 21-7. And you're like, oh boy, this thing's a rout. Like, here come the Buckeyes. How are they going to stop them? Ohio State comes out and scores the first possession of the third quarter. And literally you're thinking, all right, this looks like how it has in the past in some of these national title games, notably TCU and Georgia, which I can remember being at that in the rain-soaked SoFi Stadium here on the West Coast in LA. And then I just love like the resiliency of Notre Dame. I think the big thing you and I talked about last week was what Washington dealt with a year ago after talking to members of that staff, was they were just exhausted emotionally. They were ready for the game. They were prepared for the game. But I wondered for Notre Dame, like, God, it was just, it was a run, right? They had the home game on a Friday night. You go through their playoff run, the Penn State win in Miami at the Orange Bowl in an old school 1990s type of matchup. And you're thinking, did they just run out of steam? And I love how they battled back. I think it woke up the echoes in a unique way. I think that it continues to allow people to fall in love with their head coach, Marcus Freeman, and really Notre Dame. Right? Notre Dame's cool again. And it happened in the matter of whatever, really the last month, right? Like after they lost to Northern Illinois, it was kind of like they're always just on the radar because it's Notre Dame. But over the last month, it has just been a really impressive road to watch them. I think for Ohio State, and we talk about this with our guest, Ben Hartsock, of course, always presented by our founding partner, 76, of like, is it the best team ever? Like, is it? And I wrote about that in our newsletter of like, this is the best team my eyes have ever seen. And since we penned that at yoption.com, I've been really thinking about it even more, Jim, of like, all right, with that 05 team at SC, if they played the 2024 team of Ohio State, who would win the game? 01 Miami. I remember playing against them. They were loaded. I mean, this is Willis McGahee. This is Andre. This is like, these are monsters we're playing against. Andre Johnson and Hall of Famers. Would they win the game? 2019 LSU, would they win the game? 2020 Alabama, would they win the game? And I don't know. Like, I don't know where you net. I'm like torn on that because, and then I go to like the culture. I know one of those intimately at SC. And I'm like, dude, we were kind of gangsters. Like, we might not have had like the player when you look at the draft, like who was our edge rushers compared to the ones we saw. They were good. They were third round picks. They played in the NFL. Like, did we have a safety like Caleb Downs? No, but we had some talented players. Like Cushing was a freshman, right? He wasn't a fifth-year senior like Jack Sawyer, for instance. So I don't know. I get torn now of like, I probably think the edge and the swag of Pete Carroll and the Trojans might take down Ohio State. But I still believe in what I wrote, which is Ohio State's the best team I'd ever seen from a talent standpoint.
Well, it's funny because, maybe, with the way things had kind of stalled out a little bit there towards the end. I mean, without that Will Howard to Jeremiah Smith, we're having an entirely different conversation right now. But what I will say to your point is, obviously you're much more of a talent evaluator than I will ever be in my life. But I look at it more as far as the run that Ohio State went on, and just some of the facts around what happened here. I mean, this is the first ever school with 5 AP top 5 wins in a single season. They defeated all 4 of the other teams in the AP final top 5, 6 of the top 10, 7 of the top 16. I mean, whether or not they are or aren't, they definitely earned it. And I can't think of anyone that had a harder run ever to the title. Like, I think that part is definitely undisputable. And like from a statistical part of that, like they dominated the playoffs. They only trailed for 6 minutes of the entire playoff. And that was when they had the ball after Notre Dame scored on the opening drive and this one. So it's like, it's from that level, I think I'm not, I could give my opinion, but it's not, I don't think it has the same credibility as you, having been with all that as far as a talent level. But as far as like just looking back at the run that they had, I can't think of anybody that had a run like that. And that's a format is a reason for that.
Yeah, I think it's a nuanced conversation because you could argue the run that SC had on, like, we won 30 some straight games. Miami had in the midst of 30 some straight wins. Like, there's a different run, like 2 straight national championships for the Trojans on their way to the 3rd. Like, it's a nuanced dialogue because this was such a nuanced year. Like, it was the core of Ohio State, but you can argue their biggest contributors, at least in the conversation of the top of that list, are all additions, whether it's Jeremiah Smith, Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs. I mean, easily 4 of their best 6 players. You can put them in whatever order you want, but they're in that order. Even their center, Seth McLaughlin, like he wins the Remington Award, came from Alabama. Like, that didn't happen in previous years. But regardless of the comparison, you're right. Like, what they had to earn is going to be so hard to replicate. Like, I think people will come close to that moving forward because you're going to have to beat 2 teams in the top 5 probably to win it all. But will you beat everybody that's ranked behind you in the top 5? I think to your point, I'd say unlikely. I think we can all learn a big lesson though from Ohio State. And to me, I go back to like the resiliency of this team. The more and more, and we were the first ones to ask the question on air of like, tell me about this players only meeting. We did it at the Rose Bowl Media Days. And I remember asking Jack Sawyer, kind of like when you're a broadcaster or you're on a desk, you're like, yeah, why not ask it? You don't know if you're going to get anything. They might say, we're going to keep that in between the 4 walls. We're going to keep that in-house. And they openly talked about it. And then the next guest came up, Emeka Mbuka. And I was like, what do you think about it? And then Will Howard. And all of a sudden at the Rose Bowl, this thing really caught a lot of attention. And by the time the national championship game ended, I think the documentary was already sold. Like, it's just which player wants to be the executive producer on it in 5 or 10 years, and they all want to talk about this thing publicly. Like, it is 100% only focused on the players only meeting with Ryan Day. What happened? Because it just sounds like it was more intense than anything that either any of us have experienced in sport or could have anticipated in a setting like that. And I just think that Ryan Day deserves to be on the pinnacle right now of college football in terms of he's had to navigate things that nobody else had to. He's one of 3 coaches that have won a national championship, Dabo Swinney and Kirby Smart, now in college football. But neither of the former had to navigate this landscape in the way that Ryan Day did. And before you say, well, he had all the money, they had all the resources, as he referenced after the game, they didn't go out and just buy a team. Like, they cultivated a team. They had guys mission-minded that wanted to come on back instead of go make their dream a reality in the NFL. And yes, they got paid to come back, but you still have to do the work. Just because you get paid doesn't mean like it all happens. Look no further than the rest of college football, because everybody's getting paid in college football. And I just think that was so impressive, man, for him to stare adversity in the face. He never once said, I wish Chip called a better game. I wish Jim Knowles called a better game. God, we need our O-line to play better. Like, he wore it all. And you saw it on him. His family wore it all. I mean, he was written about a ton. Bruce Feldman, most beautiful article I think I've seen about like the pressure that his family felt, but also the lessons his family navigated and learned and illustrated. And I just want to keep highlighting that because that's what I think I'll remember the most about the season. Maybe we'll remember 3rd and 11, maybe. But I'm going to remember like the flag planting, the world seemingly over in Columbus, and then to your point, the run that they went on where they just rolled the best teams in the country.
Well, to that point, I mean, let's go back to that Michigan game, because I've had people say it to me, I've seen it online, and they talk about how with Ohio State winning this game and Notre Dame being in this game, with these being the 2 teams playing for the championship, that it's kind of devalued the regular season. Like, oh, losing to Northern Illinois didn't mean anything. Losing to Michigan didn't mean anything. And that there won't be as much interest in some, in the Ohio State Michigan game. I have a friend that texts me all the time about that. Like, it's not going to be like that. But I think if you ask Ohio State fans and Michigan fans, there will never be any lack of interest in that game. Now, maybe to the non-Ohio State Michigan fans, might that maybe not have as much interest as there has always been in the past. But I think this college football season was so special in the fact that none of us knew really what to expect. But you got to see these other teams, whether it be Arizona State or Boise State or SMU, all at least have a chance.
Yeah.
Like, to do it on the field. And which you would have never seen in the old format. So I'm just curious, what your take is on the format now, now that you can have that 2020, that vision, the hindsight does it devalue the regular season for you at all?
I don't think so. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I'll challenge that. Like, it adjusts 100 years of how we viewed the regular season. You would view, let's just take the easy one, Ohio State, Michigan, loser, you're going to a bowl game, but you're out. You're not going to the championship game. You're not playing the playoff. Season's over. Like, yeah, that was a reality. I think there's something cool to that. Like, for sure. I love the stakes in that. Or if you lose early in the season, I love that, like, yeah, it just kind of whittles it down. I think what this new format has done is given teams more life. Like, it's given a team who's 4-1, they're staring adversity in the face, or 1-1 like Notre Dame and saying, all right, guys, it's win or go home now, right? Or Indiana, or you name the school. Like, I think it gives more people, and look no further than Arizona State, Boise State, SMU, and Indiana as the teams that, like, they found a way in to the playoff I put Clemson in that too, that like normally wouldn't have, with multiple losses on the season, Clemson being that example. And now they get that. Now, do I have issues with the seeding? Yeah, I think that's a fair conversation. I don't know what's going to change in 1 year, if it's going to expand to 14 a year after that. I think it's a fair conversation. Like, Oregon shouldn't have had the most challenging of paths after being undefeated. That's fair. And I do think the committee needs to get out of the dialogue of, we just do what we were asked to do. We don't look at the potential matchups. Like, I think that's not reality. I think it's your job to do that. I think the calendar needs to change. I talked to a coach last night who referenced, there's an idea coming out of the South that was like, move the season up, take a bye away, and you're playing the game January 6th for this championship, or January 7th or something like that. I think those things are the nuanced part of it. But I don't think there's a coach in the country that's going to say, yeah, the regular season doesn't matter anymore. I think they're going to say, good, like, we get to know our team a little bit more. Because the flip side of that, if you is saying, well, give us then preseason games. Let us get to know our team a little bit more. And we're never going to do that. Like, that's never going to happen in college football. Like, there's zero chance. I mean, we're lucky, and I say this as a guy who loves spring football as much as anyone. We're lucky that spring games are still getting televised. I mean it. And not the premier schools is one thing. It's the secondary schools. It's teams 30 through 60. Because I know this for a fact, folks. Group of 5 schools I've talked to that are like, I don't want our spring practices even open to anybody because our DB is better than the Power 4 school I just came from. I talked to a coach in the Mountain West who coached in, I'll just say because it's easy to skirt it, coached in the old version of the Pac-12. So you can guess which team it was. And they were like, our secondary is better than where I came from, and I don't want anybody to know. So, yeah, I don't think it's devalued, to answer your question. I think it's just adjusted. Like, the lens in which we have to view the season is adjusted. Just like in the NFL. Like, the games are still incredibly exciting. And I called a bunch of those second-tier games. Like, when I'm calling, like, Indiana, Washington, dude, Washington's out of it. But it's still an awesome game when Indiana's in it, right? Or a couple one-loss teams. And I called SC, Minnesota. They both had 2 losses. I think Minnesota might have 3 at the time. It was an awesome game. So I don't think it's a bad thing.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Yeah, I would agree with it. And I think, like, just on a personal level for me, as far as like interest, those last 2 weeks of the regular season, I paid attention to more Big 12, ACC, Mountain West, mid-tier SEC, Big 10 games than I ever would have in the past. Now, granted, that's partly because of the old job where we were so dialed into the 12 teams that were in the Pac-12. It was almost like the other schools didn't even exist in that world. But I mean, I found it so, I think about that, that UNLV Boise game. Like, I was fired up to watch that game, and it was a fun game. In the past, I probably would have been, I got work to do. I got to pay attention to other stuff. But like, I think this broadens this horizon. This gives more schools hope. Now, do I think, is there a chance that any of these other schools that didn't make it, whether it's, my school like Arizona, or you look at like Syracuse or Cal or whoever, like, are those schools really going to be able to compete with the Ohio States of the world with the way that college football sits right now? I don't know. But at least when you look at a team like Arizona State, they were at least able to have that opportunity on the field and really had the opportunity to beat Texas.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. Like, every time I hear somebody say like college football's never been healthier, and I get it. Like, everybody said college football is going to fall apart with the portal and then with the NIL, and it hasn't. It's flourishing. But we have to also like be realistic and think of the teams that just live out west where we live. They're all not saying that, right? There's Power 4 teams and huge programs that are like cutting staff's jobs to make sure they add that money to their NIL pool. Like, so to think that everybody is Ohio State would be ignorant. And to think that like the mid-level teams in major college football are playing at the same level financially as everybody else at the premium level in college football. It's just, you're just not seeing it. Like, you're just not talking to enough people. Like, that's just not how it works. Now, those schools, and we've said it many times, Cal, you referenced Cal, like, how many times have I said it on this show? Like, if you throw down there at Cal, you got a real shot. I mean, look at the players you produced 20 years ago, 10 years ago, in recent years. Like, you can have a lot of talent, and look at where they sit now, getting one of the top quarterbacks in America coming in. They just got a big portal addition coming from Ohio State, a one-time USC commit. How about this? You remember that? Coming out of the state of Utah, rocking number 33, and now he's playing for the Cal Bears. So that'll be kind of fun. That'll be kind of cool.
One last question here before we move on. So, like, we saw the final, AP poll came out, and it was the two teams that played in the championship game as 1 and 2. Oregon was third. Now, Oregon has actually now has an official national championship from this season. It's called the Wolf Ratings. It's something that the NCAA actually does recognize. Now, I don't know if Oregon is going to recognize it. This is actually the same thing that Washington won the year before, and they're not recognizing that either. But when you look at the end of the day, I think, obviously Ohio State won. It's clearly they were the best team in the country this year. Who do you think was the actual second best team in the country this year?
That's a good question. First, it made me think, like, should we have, like, the Y Option National Championship?
Hey, why not?
Okay, so give me the top 5. What's the final order again?
It was obviously Ohio State, then Notre Dame, then Oregon, then I want to say it was Texas, and then I believe Georgia. I think that was the top 5 there. I know it's funny because Georgia fans is like, how many times do we have to beat Texas to be ranked ahead of them?
You got to have a healthy quarterback. Like, I think I'm a big fan of the totality of the season. We have this debate in the CFP. Is it the best right now, or is it the best through the body of work? I understand both lenses, but with where we sit now, the season, thankfully over, I'm going to go the number 2 team in America is Oregon. I believe that they're the only team, the only team in the playoff that beat the national champion. I think that you look at the run they went on, just to give you some perspective, only one team had ever gone undefeated in the history of the Pac-12. That was Washington a year ago. They just, in their first year in the Big Ten, went undefeated, and they played real teams. They went to real places. They didn't have an easy schedule. There's some teams in the Big Ten, whether it was last year, like I look at the schedule this year, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, Illinois, you got a nice little path here. Like, they're going to watch it. They'll be the sexiest team in the entirety of the offseason. And I can't wait. I hope I get out there for spring football to go watch them. But it's because their schedule. I'm looking at their schedule right now. Like, it's not as challenging. The Ducks, it was brutal. They went to Michigan. They hosted Ohio State. Like, you know the schedule by now. We've
8
gone
straight
through it
weeks.
if you're a Duck fan. Yeah, 8 straight weeks is exactly right. And then they get the bye. Then they got to go play Penn State in the Big Ten title game, which is clearly a long trip away. And then they get to the Rose Bowl, but it's against the team that just won the national championship. So I'd go Oregon. I don't think that thing's going anywhere. I think they are unique. We wrote about it in the newsletter a little bit of, like, you could look at Arizona State, massive turnover in year 1, a bunch of turnover again in year 2, and they're in the playoff. Look at Ohio State, national champions, core group of this team, recruited out of high school, supplemented premium players in the portal. Oregon's kind of in the middle. Like, they've got a healthy amount of turnover, over the last 2 years. Like, we're talking like 30 to 40 players. Like, it's not like it's 6 or 12. So I don't know what the best model is. It's probably what fits per school. This is where I net out, is like, regardless of model, when you look at the teams that made it to the playoff, and there's a bunch of styles, right? Indiana style, clearly dramatically different than Ohio State or Oregon or ASU or Boise State or anybody in between. I think I look at all 12 teams and I'm like, I haven't been in all their team rooms, but the ones I have been in are dramatically healthy. What are they healthy in? They got an extremely competitive culture. They've got an extremely dialed in communication culture, meaning like people are very clear on where they stand. And it's built upon, how can I love my teammate harder? How can I show up for my colleague more? How can I not make the reality of a transactional world feel transactional? And that, to me, is the thing. I've talked to a lot of people about their GM position this offseason, and I was on a thread last night about it, of like, the number one thing I'd be pouring into is like, how are we building our culture? And it's a broad word. It's generally generalized and often overused, but ultimately it's how are you making everyone in the building feel seen and feel as though they have an opportunity to grow, and then feel connected to all of the aspects of the program. Folks, that is not an easy thing. It's why most coaches in the NFL flame out their first time. Like, it's going to be fascinating to watch Ben Johnson. I cannot wait to watch him in his first year. Jared Goff has raved about him in beautiful ways to me. Can't wait to watch it. And then what happens by the time we get off here? I'm like checking my Adam Schefter Twitter here. Like, did Pete Carroll get hired yet at the Raiders? Nothing as we sit here at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. But like, here's a guy who knows like the back of his hand how to build culture. So I just keep going back to that. Like, Dan Lanning, that place is as healthy as ever been. Look at what Ryan Day did. That thing should have splintered. Most places it would have. When you're talking about the money, the prestige, the personality, didn't. Penn State, same deal. Didn't. Like, Indiana, didn't. Like, Arizona State, didn't. You just keep going up and down the list. It's so impressive, man. Like, Clemson, the way they're doing things, they're totally different than everybody else, regarding the transfer portal. Like, didn't. And I just think that I'll just keep going back to that. Like, that will be my spring study, man. Of all the places I go to, I'm going to keep asking around what matters most and how confident are you, and are you disciplined, and then show me that discipline. Speaking of, I'm heading to Alabama in a couple weeks. I'll have a great report coming back from Kalen DeBoer and everything he's doing there. So a lot of fun stuff going on in that regard.
You know who has a really good answer on that question? Our guest today.
Our guest. Look at you with the bridge. Let's get to him because we're just rolling here. This is Ben Hartsock, 10-year pro in the National Football League, national champion at Ohio State, was on the field, of course, working the game for SiriusXM. More importantly, was on the field celebrating with the school that he loves so dearly. Thankfully, he hopped on our show today for the very first time. So on behalf of our founding partners, 76, really proud to present to you a national champion. Maybe he's claiming this one too. We'll find out. Ben Hartsock. All right, as mentioned, Ben Hartsock, 10-year NFL vet, national champion of the Buckeyes, and I know walking proud today after his Buckeyes win it again. Thanks for joining Y Option, man.
It's a good day to be a Buckeye. It's always a good day to be a Buckeye, but it's awesome, Yogi. It's funny how we all reflect, and I always love talking to you because you're so thoughtful, and I'm so sentimental. And every time things like this happen, it makes my own memories sweeter of when I got to do this, because it was kind of surreal. This is the first time as a broadcaster I've been on the field with my team there. And so, like, specifically, G. Scott Jr. was one of these glue guys. He wears 88. I wore 88. They were the white jerseys when we won our title. Like, I was on the other side of the microphone, and so it makes my memory sweeter, and it makes me so thankful that another generation of Buckeyes got to make this memory that I hold so, so dear to my heart. It's a treasure. It's a treasure for me. It's a treasure for our family, but it's a treasure for the fans of that school. So I am riding high. I really am, and it's something that I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for my memory, but I'm even more thankful that another generation gets to have those memories made.
Yeah, I think I'm always so curious what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. So if we go to post game, to your point, you're interviewing people that wore the uniform that you used to don back in the day. That's a different experience than being an alum or being a fan. Like, how was that for you in real time? You could take us back to Monday night in Atlanta.
Yeah, I talk about college football seasons as their life amplified. Like, one season represents a lifetime. And when this team won its championship, one of the threads you hear is the adversity they faced and how they circled the wagons and the loss to Michigan, and they came out, and from those losses they supercharged themselves to the team that went through the playoff and all the way to the championship. And it's kind of like people that live the experience have the uniqueness of living it, but the people that watch it experience it and learn the lessons in a secondary way. So it's not quite the same, but it certainly is. Like, that's part of the passion of college sports, is the season we won in 2002, people still talk to me of the lessons they learned. I learned them from a first person view of what it was like to go through that. But thousands, if not millions of fans for this team and my team learned those lessons. And I'll tell you, even zoom out a bit, like hearing guys like Travion Henderson and G. Scott and Will Howard and even Riley Leonard and the loss, the spirituality, their Christian faith was such a very impactful part of this season that they leaned on as the adversity came, as they were being criticized and questioned and undermined. And so those guys learned spectacular lessons and displayed unbelievable wisdom as 22-year-old young men that I know that as a 44-year-old, I'm impressed, and I will apply what they demonstrated to my own life. And I know that thousands and thousands of fans will hopefully take those lessons, both in the victories perspective of Ohio State fans and even the loss, the lessons and the leadership of Marcus Freeman and Riley Leonard and Jaden Greathouse. That's what this game is why this game is so magical, is it's life amplified.
Yeah, well, that's well said. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've taken from Ohio State's run, and I've been covering them all year, but really intimately in the playoff, and I appreciate their vernacular because they didn't try to sugarcoat it. I think they just kept saying, we got to fight. And the easier, maybe the softer, more correct version of it might be like, we got to compete. Like there's other ways to say what they did, but ultimately backs against the wall, things are challenging. We got to fight our way out of it. I thought Bruce Feldman wrote the most beautiful piece among all of the beautiful pieces written about the Buckeyes, which is about the Day family. Mm-hmm. And what his son referenced was like, I just learned, like, when it gets hard, like you band with the people that you love most, which are your teammates or your family members, and you go fight. I say that to you because I'm wondering, because I feel like I'm on the inside a little bit with this team. You're more inside than anybody. What do we need to know about the fight that came out of that team meeting that I think right now is like a documentary just waiting for somebody to tell in 10 years?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear more details as guys get more comfortable and kind of marinate on it and reflect upon it and then start sharing it, that we'll get more insight into that. But I hear, being on the game being on the field post game, when you talk to different players and they use that same vernacular, that same verbiage, okay, you can say, oh, they've heard that from the top. That was spoken from the podium in the team meeting room from Coach Day or from the coordinators. And I heard multiple guys say this, gathering those interviews. They said this, it's all about the guys in the Woody. It's all about the guys in the Woody. And it's funny, that sounds almost like every team circles its wagons, but it almost sounded like it would be easy to say, well, like they're turning their backs on their fans. And here's kind of how I'm starting to, I think I'm grasping it, is this is a relationship. Fans and their team have a loving, genuine, loving relationship with each other. And Yogi, you're married, I'm married. I know that, but in my marriage relationship, sometimes there's struggle, there's conflict, there's issues. And that Michigan loss was represented a pretty big bump in the road for that relationship. And the players felt stung and they circled their wagons. And you know what it did, Yogi? When we've heard champions recently stand on the championship stage, I'm reminded of Nolan Smith, the talented Georgia football player, that said after they were holding there watching the confetti rain down, he said, nobody believed in us. And we all scratch our head and we're like, yeah, we did. You guys were absolutely stacked. You were preseason number one. You won every game. What do you mean? But then think about those Chiefs teams with Patrick Mahomes. He said the same kind of thing. Nobody believed in us. And everybody's like, yeah, we did. Everybody knew you're the Chiefs. You got the Travis Kelce and on. But coaches have to motivate, and Kirby Smart does it, and Andy Reid does it. And you have to almost convince. It's like theater of the mind. Convince yourself to have a chip on the shoulder. This Ohio State team didn't have to manufacture that chip. That hurt of the Michigan loss, that hurt they felt from their own fans who they love. You know they love each other. That is they are healing their relationship. But that chip that Ohio State demonstrated, I think we'll learn through history and as guys start to tell the story, that the loss and the sting is a more genuine, authentic motivation that helped bring them to life, like what we saw run through the postseason.
Yeah, that's a great line, man. I mean, I felt this and said it on our post-game show, which was a version of the postseason now in college football is allowing, call it 12 teams, to learn tremendously deeper life lessons than they would in the traditional 14 playoff. And I don't think I would have ever have thought of that concept coming into the season for Notre Dame, for Oregon, for Indiana, like everybody who's won or lost, of course, for Ohio State. Like, I think they learn. So here's my next question for you. You spent 10 years in the NFL. You play with some really talented quarterbacks, really talented wideouts. Do you think, with all the money in the NFL, now the salary cap in the NFL is different than what it is at Ohio State. And we all know the reported number on Ohio State's team. Ryan Dave referenced it many times post-game of like, we didn't just go buy a bunch of players. Like, we had a great culture. Then we added, and I think we all would agree, it's great that the players are getting compensated to a large degree now. Mm-hmm. Do you think what they did this year is unique even when it comes to like NFL teams full of grown men who all get paid a ton of money that are able to bounce back from crazy adversity? Like, do you see a comparison there? Do you think that it's even, more unique than some of the teams that you played in during your decade in the NFL?
I think it's early. It's early to know. We live in professional college football. Like, it's here. It's been here a couple years, and we're still wrapping our minds around it. And this is what I hope as a more of a traditionalist in college football. College football was more transformational. It's now more transactional. Yeah. That doesn't mean that it's not transformational anymore. It just requires a little more effort, some creativity to make sure that transformative, that culture word that gets far too often. Look, one of my favorite examples in the NFL of a team that has high culture is the Lions. They took the loss recently, but Dan Campbell, in a world that the NFL, I lived it very harshly. The NFL is a transactional world. You are used as long as you are usable, and then you are cast to the side. I lived that for my entire career. But Dan Campbell has done a spectacular job of building an identity of loving each other, and he does it from the front. So I would hope that I want transformational life lessons like what I opened with to happen in the NFL too. But a lot of times that gets washed away by, the salary cap and so-and-so is taking this money and that money. I want to protect that. I wish it was bigger in the NFL, and I want to protect it in college. So I think when I say answering your question, I hope that college will stay college, because it's still, there's something magical about age 17 to 22. Yeah. And it's not just college. A lot of it is people that go to college, but it's people that go to military. It's people that go to work, that you are figuring out life as a maturing young adult. You're out of your family's childhood home and you're figuring life out. And I've said this a lot about Coach Dressel, and I've said it to Ross Bjork, the athletic director of Ohio State. I met him for the first time on the field pregame. I said, outside of my own family upbringing, the single biggest influence and impact of me as a young person to make me the man I am today were those 4 or 5 years with the Reds, or 5 years I had spent at Ohio State. And so I want to defend that till my last breath. As we professionalize, as these kids become millionaires and multimillionaires, I want to make sure to protect that. So I hope what Ohio State was, and Notre Dame too, because they were very similar, and that these were highly vested teams, veteran teams. Yeah, they had key transfers, Riley Leonard and Will Howard and Caleb Downs, and everywhere there were key transfers. But the majority of the money spent, the pay for play to get these guys on the field, were retaining talent, keeping Jack Sawyer another year, keeping Denzel Burke another year, keeping Xavier Watts another year, and on and on and on. So I hope, my hope is that this is the rule, not the exception.
Best roster and or best team you've ever seen? Is that this year's team? Like, where do you compare them in your long, illustrious history around the game?
If they had been undefeated, you're 100% having that conversation. Put them up against the 0-1 Miami team. Put them up against the Georgia team a couple of years ago, the LSU team of 2019. But we've poked a lot of fun at hypotheticals for the SEC schools this year. Ohio State can't be taken in that context because they lost Oregon and Michigan in the regular season, and that's unacceptable. I think for this Ohio State team, I had this conversation today on my Sirius show. non-Ohio State fans will remember this Ohio State team as the first bought and financed champion, the first super team. Super teams became it was introduced into our language back with LeBron James when he went to Miami. Like the whole concept of the super team became a thing of don't compete against your rival. Go, Jordan would never think of playing against Ewing, right? So now you've got join Dwayne Wade and LeBron James. So super team became that. Then non-Ohio State fans will remember this Ohio State team as the first super team, bringing in Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins and all of that. And so what? Ohio State fans will remember them as champions.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like I was having this thought. I write a newsletter every Sunday from my flight back, or this week, of course, I did it on Tuesday, flying back from the game or from our work on Monday night. And I'm sitting there because I saw it in training camp, and I was like, this is the best team I've ever seen. And I always comp it to the team I coached at SC in 2005 that lost to Texas. Yeah. That was the best team I'd ever seen. And you're trying to like play the matchup game, and you look at the rosters and who would go in the NFL, where would they get picked. I played against that 0-1 team in Miami that you referenced. I mean, you've played against great teams too. And it was hard for me to say like the roster that I'm looking at Ohio State in August and or on Monday night is not the most talented roster. And now here we sit, 48 hours since then. I'm like, I don't know, like who would win in that game? Because you're right, like you are. That's a cool thought of like this was the first roster constructed in the most unique of ways, which is where we sit today in reality. Miami was constructed in like recruit the daylights out of Florida, and you're just following the footsteps of the people that did it before you. SC was a Pete Carroll run, and that was really Carson led him to an Orange Bowl, and then it was 2 straight natties on your way to the third, and it was all through high school recruiting. I wonder if we need to chunk like that conversation into eras and have that respect, because it is tough. You think of even the 2020 Bama offense, it's the best offense I've probably seen since Leinart and company way back in the day. All right, I want to get you out on this because we already kept you a little too long. I've been having this internal conversation, man, around the question of what wins, right? You've got Notre Dame and Ohio State, and let's just go Michigan, Washington, the last 2 years in the national championship. They won with high school recruiting and supplementation at a premium level in the portal, whether it's Michael Penix Jr. or whether it was the quarterbacks in this year's games, et cetera. And then you've got like Arizona State and Colorado, which you could argue like they've won at a really healthy level too. Arizona State being in the playoff, and they added like 70 new faces 2 years ago to the roster and another 40 to 50 this past year. So I'm curious for you, like, when you see different models getting people to, the end of the season in contention for real stuff, like what do you think if something that's out is the answer to the question of what wins?
Yeah, Arizona State's a good outlier to me. But I would point to Kenny Dillingham. I think he's magic. I think he's got some Dan Campbell in him. Yeah. I think he's got some real juice as a young, engaging, energetic, passionate guy that I would point to him specifically, and Scattaboo obviously to explain a lot of that. But if I'm looking to, we are more now, college is more NFL than it's ever been. Look at long-term sustained success in the NFL. It is Ravens. I know the Steelers are struggling a little bit right now, but they've been good for a long time. And the Green Bay Packers are 3 teams that jump to mind. They have long been draft and develop. They have, in a world where it's like if you're not good immediately, cast to the side. Green Bay tends to give a little more runway to players to figure out what it takes to be in the NFL. So I think that the model of the teams that you reference, Ohio State and Notre Dame, this year's example, talent evaluation has never been more difficult, but it's never been more important, because trying to win the sweepstakes on the next Dylan Raiola or Bryce Underwood or these unproven products coming out of high school, I think we're going to see, just like the NFL is 50-50 with first round draft picks. I think you experience and developing over long periods of time is ultimately the recipe. But quarterback's always going to be its own discussion. But in every other position where you've got depth and you can get reps as a younger player, that's going to be better than just buying and transacting teams year over year. Because if back in my day and when you and I were younger, that was the Raiders. Just draft the biggest, fastest guy every year and expect to win the Super Bowl. And we've learned over time that doesn't work.
Yeah, it'll be interesting by the time we publish this, like what news comes out of the Raiders, if they do end up hiring Pete Carroll or if he ends up taking it, if they offer it to him. I think it's a cool thought. I think it's one that we'll definitely want to track, because I think the thing that gets no run right now is that backups at the premium schools, the Blue Bloods, are just getting offered an insane amount of money to leave. So is it going to be, hey, we're going to have to play everybody, so you're playing and we're paying you, and you're a starter just because we drafted you, to your point of younger guys? I don't know how that's going to shake out. I don't think it's great for like the depth of some of these premier teams.
I think it's a fascinating landscape for high school players to navigate. Oh, yeah. Every high school kid wants to go Power 4. Yeah. I understand that sentiment. That's totally understandable. But the reality is high school players need to get on the field as quickly as possible. That if you are so fortunate to get an offer to Georgia and you sit the bench for a year, you're you're at giant risk to get hopped by somebody who played at the Sun Belt. So as a high school student, that if you're not a top 100, if you're not an elite 11, if you're not a true blue chipper, I think you have to have some hard conversations about, should I go to Georgia Southern and try to ball out in year one and not have that prestige of saying I went Power 4, but I can go have success at a smaller school and then come up the next year. Again, the traditionalist in me hates that, because I want these kids to have a 4-year experience at a university, and I want them all to start, but I know that doesn't ever happen, for everybody. But that's kind of, you have to operate under the circumstances of the rules as they're written right now. And for high school players, it's a tenuous time and a choice to make.
Man, we could talk about that all day, and we could talk all day, because the thing that gets lost in that is that, okay, you don't go to Ohio State with your freshman class. You don't build the bonds that you have fallen in love with. Mm-hmm. But as Anthony Herron, our colleague at Big Ten and SiriusXM, said on my show last week, he's like, guys are running a business. Mm-hmm. So in the business, is it go play for Clay Helton, to your point, at Georgia Southern, play for 2 years, and then go play for Kirby Smart? Like, I'm an advocate of having a minor league system for these blue blood programs. And the thing forgotten totally is, I don't know about you, but I remember freshman year being like, holy crap, like this is a lot of an adjustment. I got to go to school. I'm away from home. Like, there's the mental side of like, you're never going to be at your best like you were your senior year of high school, your freshman year in college, wherever you go. So there's just so many there. All right, we gotta
real quick, Yogi. Yeah. I appreciate you taking my time, but I love talking to you. I'm thankful for both of these teams in the championship, because you saw those relationships. Even Will Howard and Riley Leonard, they were only there for a calendar year, but those guys drank the Kool-Aid and they fully ingratiated themselves to those universities. So it was a breath of fresh air for me to experience that, because I, just like you say, those relationships are so powerful, and I want to protect those. But the inverse of that is it's by the concept of falling in love with your teammates as a freshman class, the way you and I did, is a thing of the past. John Jansen's a Michigan All-American radio voice for the team. I asked him about that when Jim Harbaugh was flirting, the 2 years he flirted with the NFL. And I said, I can't, John, you have to help me make sense. How does Jim Harbaugh go back into that team meeting room after not getting the job a couple years ago and say, all right, boys, I'm with you. Let's go. Knowing that your coach just took a hall pass to try to go find greener pastures. And he helped me. He said, man, Ben, you're never going to get it, because I'm never going to get it, because we're dinosaurs. Yeah. Kids today's in these locker rooms, because of 7-on-7 culture and AAU culture, here's what they do. They go into the locker room, they see their locker, they sit down, they say, okay, there's a teammate. All right, you're my teammate. Then that's my teammates for today, this season, a couple of seasons. And you see it in high school too. Dylan Raiola is the perfect example. 4 high schools in 4 years. That's just the circumstance. It breaks my heart a little bit that that's the case, but I'm thankful that even still today, there's a breaths of fresh air like this Notre Dame and Ohio State team that kind of come above that surpass that and still fight for those, I argue, that are traditional college family values.
Yeah. Oh, that's good, man. Okay. I got to ask you about Jeremiah Smith, because he might be the number 1 pick. I saw a mock draft this morning and I was like, I don't think I'd pick that guy. I'd take this guy. You
Yeah.
played with Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, Roddy White, Steve Smith. You also had great quarterbacks that you played with at times in the league. Where does Jeremiah Smith, like, what do you see when you see that with the experience that you had catching balls from elite quarterbacks and knowing what special receivers in that room stands for when it comes to elite performances?
Think about how quickly we forget Marvin Harrison Jr. was just in the building a year ago. We haven't mentioned Marvin Harrison, and that guy was an absolute generational type of player.
Yeah.
And Jeremiah Smith comes in and says, forget about that guy. Let me show you something. That's incredible. The run of wide receiver talent that Brian Hartline, the wide receiver coach, has recruited and developed is spectacular. Jeremiah, we're familiar with high school with LeBron's and Kevin Garnett's going straight to the NFL like that. There's an era of that in the NBA but in college, it's the 3 years. And I remind people, that's an NFL rule. That's not a college rule. The NFL is the one that says you have to be 3 years removed from high school before you can go to the NFL. But every once in a while, there's a guy like Jeremiah Smith. He's not only is he ready, like physically, like it's different than the NBA. A 18-year-old is not at physical risk if he goes and plays in an NBA game because it's a different sport. It's not as the contact is different. It's maybe sound a little disrespectful, but in the NFL, if you take most 18-year-olds or Jeremiah Smith's 19-year-old, he just turned 19 in November, but he was 18 when he played the majority of the season. Most 18-year-olds, you put them in an NFL game and you're like, no, this is, please do not, like, this is legitimately unsafe. Jeremiah Smith is outside of that realm. Like he's big, thick, ready to go across the middle. There's more players in college. Shoot, Travis Hunter, who's going to be, one of the first draft picks taken next year. He's of more slight build than Jeremiah Smith. So Jeremiah Smith is ready. He was ready at 18. That doesn't happen. Just like there's only once every few generations that a LeBron or a Kevin Garnett is truly NBA ready. I think the same thing, even maybe a little bit more time passes. But Jeremiah Smith is a guy that he could have gone straight from high school to the NFL. He's that physically ready.
Wow. So well said. Ben, appreciate the time. I know we kept you a little long, man. I know you got a lot going on back in your home state, but thank you for the season. It's been fun to get to talk to you every week. Really value how you see the game and the lens in which you look through. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, man, it's fun to be you doing the questions and I'm having the answers. This has been a ton of fun. Always enjoy working with you, Yogi. Think a lot of you. Really do.
Thanks, brother. It's the Afterglow. Yogi Roth, Jim Thornby. That was Ben Hartsock. As always, every guest is presented by our founding partner, 76. Jim, your takeaways from Ben Hartsock.
For one, I truly appreciate him saying a few times on there how him being a traditionalist and hoping college can stay college. I know as a fellow traditionalist, I feel like we're fighting the losing battle in that war. But there's still there is something special about being on campus and being part of college. We with our kids, and it's like we want our kids to go to college. Not even as much about like what they will study and learn there, but about how you will learn to just live life. Like I learned way more about life going to college than I did in classes. Now, maybe someone will argue like, oh, you don't have to go to college to do that. You can just get roommates or whatever. But like, there's something unique about how college really brings just all sorts of different viewpoints that you're not around normally, to kind of like just really broaden your worldview on things. But the whole back half of that interview, it's funny because it was from the point where I think it was like, oh, I got one more for you, and then from that point on. But it was great because it was when you talked about you guys talked about like what wins, and the whole philosophy behind that was just really cool. I really appreciated everything he had to say about that.
Yeah, he's an impressive guy. Get to go on his show every Tuesday, really all season long. He and Roddy, like they do a great job over on SiriusXM. It's just an absolute blast, Roddy Jones and company. So with that said, my biggest takeaway, I think, was a couple things. One is just how cool it was for him to be down on the field post-game. Like, I just think it's kind of cool. Like if that was my school and I was down there for Pitt and I was working and I got to see my team. Oh, and if I won a national title as a player, like it's just a cool thing. Because you think about it, 3 national championships in 50 years, guys. Like that's so impressive when you look at Ohio State and what they've done this year and how hard it is to get this done. So I think that thing stood out. I think too, I love just talking about like, was it the best team he ever saw? Like we wrote about it at yoption.com. Like it's at the time, like I'm thinking, yeah, this is the best team I've ever seen, best roster. And he's like, they stumbled twice. You can't say it. You can't have an argument. And I was like, that's fair. That's fair. Who would win in the matchup is maybe a different discussion. And I think overall, I think where we netted out is like, to your point of him being an old school college football fan, you just referencing you and your kids and the college experience, I fall in the same bucket. I loved his thoughtfulness around like how to see it through just the reality of where we're at today. And you can still be thoughtful in that regard. Overall, like he's just a good dude who clearly lives and breathes football at every level, and college football he's dialed. So fired up to get him. We'll get a couple other people, I'm sure, regarding his colleagues. We'll have some news about Y Option as well coming up soon. That'll be pretty fun to break with you. We're trying to get it to as many homes, ears, cars as humanly possible. We'll see if we can share that soon. And then, Jim, I am wearing a certain hat today. I haven't worn a hat in one episode. It's the Paris Musketeers hat. Jim's got a Y Option hat. You can get that hat at yoption.com. The Musketeers, we haven't even broken it down. We hired Jack Del Rio to be our head coach. I'm a minority owner in the team. We'll get Jack on the show over the course of the next month. But we're going to break some news again this week. We continue to build out the staff. I think we are going to surprise some people who love West Coast college football. You start seeing the people that are heading across the pond. I think we're going to change our tagline, man. Like we see college football through the lens of the West Coast. We also see the European League of Football through the lens of the West Coast. So an invite to everybody out there to come visit and hang with the Paris Musketeers. There it is. Our first episode of the offseason. I'm going to take a break. I'm actually going to take a little bit of offseason. I hope you do too, Jim. Shut it down for a couple days. Shut it down the back end of the week. Let's relax. We'll come back. We'll see what we're talking about next week. Let us know any of your ideas. Hit us up on Substack or on any of the social media platforms. We will be there. And as always, we thank you and love you and appreciate all of the support. Talk to you soon. Peace.